Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode number 19, Social Selling for Newbies, live show and podcast. I'm Tom Burton and here with my awesome co-hosts, Brandon Lee and Carson Hetty. And we have a really cool special guest today as well, Karen Kelly. So welcome, everybody.
Hey, Carson, did you notice he said I was awesome, but he didn't say you were awesome? I just want to point that out.
I noticed everything, but that's okay.
Yeah. Did I say that?
You said you're awesome co-host Brandon Lee and Carson Hetty. I figure if you didn't say awesome twice, it was just applicable to me.
Man, off to a bad start.
Whatever you can tell yourself, Brandon, I don't need to be awesome. I'm still trying to seek approval. I'm like a special guest star. I'm like those old shows from the 90s where it's like special guest star because you just never know when I'll be here and when I won't. So
I'm
just hoping you extend my contract, like Heather Locklear in Melrose Place.
There you go. Karen, you had no idea what you were getting into with this crowd, did you?
I didn't, but I love it already. I got special guests, so I got something.
Right.
I'll take that.
Welcome.
So Carson is an awesome co-host. I'm just going to say it for the record. Awesome. So there we go.
You go.
So a little background, Karen. I think you reached out to me. I think you heard my podcast, I did a podcast with Donald Kelly a few weeks ago, and I think you heard that and you reached out and I was also and you invited me to go on your podcast, which was great. And I was really intrigued. I think I told you at the time, like the questions you asked on the podcast and the conversation we had was really challenging and really interesting. And I was like, we got to get you on our show here. So we're going to get you back today with a lot of challenging questions. So if you're ready for that. And welcome everybody on the live stream. Welcome Karina and others. Please jump in with questions and comments or just anything today. I think this is going to be a really, really interesting episode. And I think Karen's going to bring some really unique insights that we're looking forward to jump into. So Karen, tell us a little bit about you and your background and then we'll jump into it.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Tom and gentlemen. Great to be with you today. And just a little from what you said there, Tom, my goal is when I do have guests on that have their own podcast, it's always secretly to get invited onto theirs. But I can't ask. I have to demonstrate enough value that they ask me. So kudos.
That's social selling at its best, right?
There we go. So a little bit of background about me. I spent my whole life in sales. So 20 years in corporate sales. And I probably could count on one hand how often I was trained or developed or even coached, but I really saw it as a profession and wanted to always be the best at it. So I really started developing myself in the early stages of internet when I would, take courses as things came into more innovation. I was joining associations, I was listening to podcasts and just always trying to be memorable and stand out. And because I think sales is the greatest profession when done right? And there's a lot of people that unfortunately don't do it right. And in the last 5 years since I've gone on my own doing sales training and sales coaching, I found myself supporting women in sales. And it started kind of, just organically. And now I'm seeking it. And the reason is that, going through corporate, most times I only women in the room. And I didn't really know any different. So when I'm hearing these stories now of other women and the challenges they're facing, a light's going off going, you also face that. And that wasn't right. And it didn't feel right. But in the moment, I was just surrounded with men. So I didn't even know what the emotions weren't coming up. And now they are. And I'm just like, the language we use, getting more women into sales and sales leadership, there's such an opportunity for it. And even as women founders, really finding their voice, leaning into social selling, which is everywhere. And, taking their well-deserved seat at the table. I feel very passionate about helping these women because I kind of grew up through that, unbeknownst to me that there was an other side of things. And so now I'm kind of representing the voice of the other side and for people who perhaps don't have that voice. And so I'm delighted to be what we can do to really elevate, women in sales and leadership and as men and be their allies and support them, so that we can grow the profession, collectively.
Yeah, no, I think this is, we talked, before, but I think there's a lot of things you're going to talk about maybe from the women's viewpoint, but I don't think what we're going to talk about today is exclusive to some of the things that women run into. I think a lot of people run into this, some of the things we're going to jump and talk about today. So certainly not exclusive to women, but I think you're going to provide a different and a real interesting, viewpoint on the things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then let's, one of the things that we, and Carson and Brandon, I think we'll just jump in. We kind of had a few topics that we wanted to cover today with Karen, but the first one is really, historically, right, women have, and you said, have kind of shied away from sales, right? It's not been a profession that women have generally wanted to go into. And certainly there's a lot of people that have shied away. They think of sales as like, ugh, I don't know if I want to do that. What kind of mindset shift do you think is required, or that what needs to really be, looked at to kind of shift into, hey, maybe this is something I really should consider? And what are some of those things that, you have to take into account on that mindset?
I think it's part of the individual having a mindset, but I think it's also the environment we're around in society. And sometimes it's not, you don't think of, I want to be in sales, but when you can see an enticing environment, successful, like-minded, and people that look like you might come up with the idea of like, well, this would really be interesting. Because I would say when I got into sales, I was maybe 24. And I would say most 24-year-old females are not thinking, hey, I want to get into tech sales. That's really appealing. Right. So how can we create, innately we can work on ourselves, but also as a society, how can we make it more appealing? And some of it is just even in the hiring. When you're hiring, what kind of language are you using that's inviting? Like, think about your ICP. What language are you using that's going to attract your target audience? It's no different. What language are you using that's going to attract the right person to have an inclusive culture? And so when you have, quota crushing, all these jargon, like these real war targeting and aggressive language, like you're looking for this certain type of Rambo character that most women don't identify with. And so when you want empathy and nurturing and the ability to build trust, like we're not responding to the Rambo cattle calls. We're just not.
Well, let's be real. Like, I feel like a lot of this, because I kind of cut my teeth in sales in that cold calling call center environment. I got to get the deal on my number one call. And there was a lot of, just macho confidence just festering in that type of a call center environment. And I compare and contrast that to what I do now. And, I'm very happy that I have a very diverse team. I've worked alongside a lot of amazing female colleagues over the years. And I think the key element, Karen, to your point, is that our connotation of what's successful in sales, I mean, just even the impetus for this show, social selling, how to use new tools in order to engage and create authentic relationships. But, our whole definition of what's successful sales has changed, ideally. Now, don't get me wrong. I think there's still some old ways of thinking in some pockets, but the organizations and the teams that are successful now have to look at it from the lens that you've just described. So I guess my thought process is we kind of tie this into, like our typical theme, but we're, embracing of like what you've just articulated, because I think it's super important. How do we infuse that, that empathy, that vulnerability, some of these things that honestly we all need to exhibit right now that get away from that Rambo-esque picture? How do we infuse that into our strategy now? Because it's not necessarily a muscle that a lot of people have developed. How do we do that?
Mm-hmm. I think if I just draw upon my own experience, and even the word sales, sometimes it elicits a negative, feeling with people, and they say, "Oh, I don't sell." This is for small business owners and entrepreneurs. But I said, "Well, you just shared with me you wanted to help people." Well, I want to help them. I want to help them, but I don't want to sell. And I'm like, well, it's one and the same thing, right? So it's almost the language we use creates a different way we approach our potential customers. And so for me, I sold software and equipment to hospitals. And so I wanted to help. So I think to answer your question, Carson, it's almost, are you also aligning yourself with something that's purposeful and meaningful for you? Could I sell tobacco or ammunition for war? No, because that's not who I am. And that would be a tough sell. But when I'm in hospitals and trying to make a difference, it almost becomes easier that I'll do it. Like, it was a very complex sale, the 12 to 18 month sales cycle, a lot of moving pieces. But I was always striving for this true north of, I want to help the patient, the person at the end of it. So it really wasn't hard for me. It wasn't hard sales tactics. It's like, what do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? What white paper do I need to share to invite them to look at things in a different way? And so I think if you can, first of all, understand your why. What is meaningful? What's purposeful for you? Because even as sales leaders, when you don't know that about your team, you're painting everyone with the same brush. And so what motivates one is going to be very different what motivates the other. And when I started in sale, it was the almighty dollar. We just chased the green. And now when you talk to Gen Zs, they want to be part of something bigger in a sense of community. So I think it's aligning you as an individual to something that's meaningful and purposeful in selecting an industry or a product or a service that really aligns to you, your belief. And then taking that the next level is, how can that culture, that company you join, have a leader that really fosters that and truly knows what's important to you as a woman, as not even a woman, just as an individual, as a contributing team member, so that you are motivating them, not just for what motivates everybody else, and even outside of work. Like, when you do get this commission check, well, what is it going to go to? Are you going to buy a boat? Are you near the end? You're going to go through retirement? Like, what are you doing? So I think it's really being true to yourself and knowing what's meaningful for you. And then it's not this hard sell. You just are like, I'm trying to help this person get from A to B, and I'll do whatever it takes to do that.
Love that.
Is this a good point to show your slide?
We can, absolutely. So I'll just give you a little bit of context. I read the book Daniel Pink's To Sell is Human years ago. Highly recommend it. It's a book that really shows that we're always selling. And so the people that dig their heels and say, I don't sell, there's an element of persuasion in everything we do, whether it's, watching a movie, what restaurant do we go to? And so he paneled some of the audience, and he said, when you think of the word sales, what word comes to mind? And basically, the louder, the more respondents that said the same word, the word cloud demonstrated the bigger bubble. So basically, the bigger bubble was the most respondents that said that word. And the second part, he said, was what do you see? What picture do you see when you see the word sales? And the same thing, the word cloud, the larger the word, the more respondents. And so every training session, I start with this. And the reason I start with this is because, and this is it in the background there. Well, before we say this, look at the first one. So people, when you say, what do you think of? They think of pushy. That's got the loudest response because it's the biggest. Yuck, difficult, hard, annoying. And so every training session, I start with this. And the reason I start with this is because, and this is it in the background there. Well, before we say this, look at the first one. So a bit of feedback here. You folks there?
No, we're here. So so pushy was the number one sort of item that came to mind, is what that's saying.
Yes.
It relates to all of that. And then that sort of triggered some of these other ideas and thoughts related to that.
And so when they looked at the picture, what did they think of? It was used cars, man in suit, pushy. And so two things here is that irrespective of your gender, this is what's stacked against you going into sales. This is the perception of salespeople. So knowing that, how can we be so much more intentional, purposeful to avoid being any of these things at all costs? And so I think it's just knowing what's stacked against you is one thing. The other thing is women, if there's already a reluctance to get into sales, and I don't really see myself in this male dominated, this bro culture world. And then you see this language, it affirms that initial, I don't want to get into it, because not only is it not in line with who I want to be, but then you think this is the perception of the audience. Why would I align myself with that? And when you think about why are these words still coming up? It's unfortunately at some point we've all had a negative experience with sales, but we can't let it go. And it's weird. What I don't understand is because we've all had a bad haircut, we've all been botched, at an eyebrow, but we still go back and we don't talk about it. But for some reason, sales, we continue to carry this negative connotation, and it influences, unfortunately, people who join the profession or are looking to join it.
I think that's an important point, Karen, because, that's the connotation that a lot of times we're up against as we try to formulate a strategy. And, I have 3 daughters, and I do hope that maybe one or multiple of them will someday go into sales, because it's a world that's been very, very good to me, but the word's got a negative connotation for a lot of folks. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. And I think that's been the very reason that I found success in sales, is to try to understand where the negative connotation exists and lean into the opposite, and try to almost take a counterintuitive approach to the contrary. Okay, so this has been your negative experience, right? So if I have maybe 100 customers that I'm supporting, and I can take a good cross section, very indicative of the slide that you just showed, and I know that that's what people are thinking. If I act like the opposite, and I am very consciously making investments in that relationship that are to the contrary of what you just showed, the likelihood that I can change the reputation is relatively high. Now, the other thing that we're up against too, and this kind of goes to Brandon's philosophy around, social selling sucks. The reason that we get this social selling sucks connotation is because there's a lot of, using social platforms to blindly connect and then ask for a demo immediately, or do what we like to call pitch slapping. And people do that thing. Those are the very people that perpetuate that negative connotation. So I love that you called it out in that way.
It is interesting, right? And Brandon, this kind of, I'm real quickly interested in, remember last week you were talking about your old company, and you basically had like a policy, like no sales, you didn't do any. Were you trying, when you implemented that policy, were you trying to change that perception that we just went through of the not being pushy, being perceived as that car salesman, or was it more luck that it worked out?
No, I mean, I don't know if at the time I would have said it like that. But the heart behind it was that it was basically, so the first company I started with a couple other partners. One of the partners that led sales came out of the bro culture, and it was, pound the phones and all this stuff. And I just sat on the side going, I can't believe I'm a part of this. This is yucky. I felt dirty, there's a better way to do this. And so then when I started my company alone, and I was able to influence the way that we sold, that's when I said, we've got to treat people the way we want to be treated, and no one likes to be sold, and no one likes to feel like they're put in a corner, and all those other things. So it was intentional, but it was, I didn't totally think about it like I want to change the story. I just didn't want to be like the other guy.
It's nice to hear that men, I know they do, but it's nice to hear that from men too, because you kind of assume that it's just they're all the same. That's not the truth. We're not taking them all about the brush, but it's nice to hear that you also found that icky and yucky and gross.
I'm actually very grateful. I'm grateful that I had that experience, because to be able to compare and contrast, and thinking at the time that was what sales was all about. And don't get me wrong, I was good at it. I played the game and I played it well, but to be able to look back and realize that I can now be the opposite of it and actually enjoy what I do so much more, that's where I think it really becomes meaningful. And I think that's, Karen, to your point, like I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do we continue to combat and push back on that bro culture? How do we change the norm there?
I think, first of all, before I go into that, it's also reflecting on how you feel. Like you were saying, it's good to see that. And of course, you need to see the dark to appreciate the light.
Sure.
But even as a consumer, like when you're taking a demo now for text something in your own business, and you get immediately hard sold and hard pitch and this like ring the gong, and you're just like, are you kidding me? And so I think personally, like I saw it as a salesperson myself, but when I'm the recipient of it as a customer, potential customer, you just like, it reiterates the point that this is just gross. Now I am the voice of the customer. I can tell you, and I go back to those companies and I'm like, people, buy on the way you made them feel. You made me feel like I needed to go take a shower with Dettol. Like it was just, it was bad. And so I think that there needs to be feedback and awareness, and that when you've even these companies that are creating this bro culture, it starts from the top, and the leadership creates the culture. And so I would even argue, like, a logo on the wall is not culture, because if there's an incongruence to what's written and the actions and the behavior and what we're trying to attract, then you can logo all you want and culture this, but it's fake. And you are going to attract the people that are like you. So it starts with leadership in really creating the culture that's going to attract the right kind of people. And unfortunately, some leaders that are, narrow-minded, short-sighted, not looking at the inclusive team, or not, valuing coaching and supporting their team, it's because that's what was done. They don't know any different. And so I would say, how can you interrupt the pattern and say, just because I didn't grow up this way and go through the ranks this way and I turned out okay, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to continue that pattern. People wire differently. And those people usually can't pinpoint what's contributing to their success either. And so it's like, how can you repeat it? How can you ensure that your team is doing this if you're just kind of taking what worked in the past and rolling it out? So it's at some point, it's like, let's break the pattern and let's do things different to attract the right people. So I think just the first part is aligning the culture with the type of people that can best serve your audience. If you hire jerks, like, what's going to happen to your potential prospects? There's a direct correlation. Like, your business is going to go tank, right?
So Brandon, there's some good questions that are coming up here in the chat related to this. Let's jump on those. Then I want to get into, Karen, with you a bit more about how this actually relates to social selling, which we'll do in a second. But there's been some really good questions.
Well, I got to throw this one up first because my friend Karina, and I'm glad she joined us. She's in the UK, so I know it's late for her, but I know this would be a good one for Karina. So Karina, thanks for joining us. Which one are you looking at, Tom? Which would you like up there?
Let's start with the LinkedIn user down there. Or we can start with Melvin and we'll go backwards there.
All right, there we go.
So I think this is a really good question, and Karen, I think you touched on it just a second ago, is that leadership, right? If you have, how are you going to sort of change the way you're looking at things if leadership is not supporting to that or not willing to support that? And I'm interested, Carson, and all of you, all three of you really, if you're in that situation, I don't know that you can necessarily change the leadership. Is it one of those things where you just need to go find another opportunity and don't try and fight it? Or is it fightable, from that perspective? Is there a way to influence? And I know that's going to vary from company to company, but it seems like a hard upstream swim.
So I'm happy to jump on that. I think, first off, and yes, Karen definitely touched on this, sales training is not prevalent. Sales cultures, true sales cultures of what we want to be a sales culture is not prevalent in society. It never has been. And that's why I think we've been beholden to these easy buttons of, pounding the phone and more dials and sell more widgets. And that's the training and coaching that we've gotten, right? So now, can it be changed? Absolutely. I think where it all starts, Karen said this before perfectly. It starts at the top. We have to identify that we want to have a sales culture. We have to understand what that should look like. We have to understand what are our key priorities. What are the outcomes that we're driving toward? I need a team that looks like what I want to attract as well, because, as I've built a team over the years, it doesn't do me any good to have a lot of people standing around that agree with me, that look like me. I need to make sure that I build a team that looks like what I want my team to continue to look like, different diverse backgrounds and perspectives, because ultimately my goal is to get them promoted and to continue to perpetuate our sales culture that we create. And that's how you can change it. Getting into a position where, first off, you can lead from any seat. I've always, and I've talked about this on this show before, I've always tried to be more of a problem solver where I can look at, okay, you're telling me up at the top that you need more pipeline, you need more deals, right? So let me create a mechanism by which I can go out and do that. And for me, that was social selling. Well, we've also talked about on this show, as I grew into leadership roles, I needed to make sure that it wasn't just about me anymore. I'm not, I can't sell on behalf of my team all the time. So I need to create a sales culture with the team. And there's ways to continue to do that. There's ways to continue to communicate that upward, as you were asked about, how are you performing relative to these priorities? I've got a system that works. I can, show that, I can train that, I can coach that, I can share that. So sharing best practices. There's a lot of ways that you can influence, gain influence, and earn the right to influence through those different mechanisms. We don't get a lot of training, unfortunately, in a lot of, consistently in sales. But I think there are key ways that you can, capitalize on those moments in time. The other element would be the consistency of execution over time. You can't just have training in a vacuum. A lot of times you'll see a sales training happen. There's no follow-up. There's no making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then we fall back into comfortable ways of mediocrity or failing. And I think that's where you've got to make sure that there are checks and balances to ensure that the sales training sticks. Now, Karen, you're in this game. What are your thoughts? What do you see? And how would you compare and contrast that with your time in corporate selling to, the clients that you work with today?
I think when you look at, sales training and what's being done today is if a one day is not going to do it. And I think when you look at the leadership and the compliance check, and it's like, we did it. And so sometimes people say, well, will you come in for a day? And I'm like, no, because it's not going to drive behavioral change. It's a motivational talk, and you're going to retain less than 10%. So it's all about the micro learning now. But my goal is always to be that strategic partner. And for me to be successful is for you to be successful and your team to be successful. And so how can you anchor it and support it with reinforcement, with smaller coaching sessions, going virtual to reapply the learning after, and really even then taking it to your own territory or your role and doing some role playing. And so usually I like to train the trainer, train the leader, because you can bring me in, but at some point I got to pass the baton. So you are modeling the behavior of what good looks like. The challenge is a lot of leaders don't know what that is. They're too far removed from that front line, and they shouldn't have to do it. Their job is different. The skill set's different. They're there to lead, to empower. But at the same time, they should be able to pick up a call and show them, how it's done. So it's also like, I got some skin in the game, and I'm not asking you to do something that I also wouldn't do myself. And so I think when that's not happening, there's almost a lack of respect in that you're my leader, but you're not willing to lead. And so for me to answer your question is, you need to do that reinforcement and really follow the coaching, because a lot of it is when you think about why things aren't happening, like you were saying, Carson, like if there's no pipeline, or there's gaps somewhere, like you coach to will or skill. And sometimes you're trying to throw another tech stack or a technique down their throats. But if you took 10 minutes to connect with them, you realize there's some problems at home going on. And this is what they're bringing to work. And so I think we need to also bring back this human element of, I'm here to help you. And even when you're starting this coaching to support them, is why are we doing this? So that they don't see it as, am I on a PIP? Is this a micromanagement big brother? No, my goal is to really help you. You shared when you joined here that, in the next 5 years, you wanted to develop, you wanted to do this. And in order for me to help you achieve that, I'm going to meet with you weekly for 30 minutes and help you achieve those goals. So I think part of it is just letting them know your why, create a safe space so they disarm and they're really receptive to the training, and then that follow through coaching. And like you said, Karjan, like what metrics, like where's your true north? Like, where is all this aligning to? Otherwise, are these random stars in the sky? Like, is there some universe that you're all tracking towards so you can measure, are we getting closer or not from our coaching?
Love that.
Right on. So let's switch over. Brandon, let's kind of take this a little bit more towards the social selling side of things. And, let's.
Yeah.
I know you've got some good questions for Karen related to that.
Yeah, well, Karen, we had talked, for everybody listening, Karen, Tom, and I had a quick conversation yesterday, I think maybe the day before, but we were talking about this difference between the way men sell, maybe the way women tend to sell. We were very aware of the terms and everything, but I think overall there's a reluctance that people have in social selling or using social as part of a selling process. How do people overcome that? How do we deal with that reluctance, or how do you coach people on getting started?
Yeah, I coach a lot of female entrepreneurs, startups, as well as in business teams, and like in corporate. And a lot of it is just there's this fear to put themselves out there. And sometimes they like to play small, and they might just like something. And I, the recommendation is just start. And I always say, lean into the discomfort in whatever it is, because change is on the other side. And so if we can start liking, but adding a comment, adding an insightful question, and getting some engagement back and forth. Sometimes they need to feel the proof and see, okay, that the awkwardness or that discomfort, but look what it yielded. I have now a warm lead. I can get a conversation going. So it's almost like just starting and get, working through the discomfort. But even when it comes to video, people are afraid to turn their video on. And I just think, do it once, start, progress is better than perfection. But I think in anything, it's when you see the results it's yielding, you're like, this is worth it. I don't mind doing it right now. And before you know it, you're flying. So I would say start small, but I would also say, look at other points or times in your life when you went through something that was uncomfortable, or you tried a new skill. Say Tai Chi, anything that you just tried new and you're like, I sucked at this first. Yeah, well, we all do. But you had enough belief in yourself and you put in the effort, and look where you are now. So I think we look too much forward as to we're comparing ourselves to others and we're looking forward. But I would encourage you to look back and say, well, look where I started. I was so afraid to turn on my video. And now I've sent out 5 prospecting videos. And out of that, I've got a meeting. And so start small and just look at what is it getting me? So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, when we're so inwardly focused, I would always say, who are we making it about? Us. It's not about us. So my voice, my hair, my whatever, I am doing, the focus needs to be on my prospect and the message I'm delivering to try to help them achieve their goal. So the more I'm in my head, I'm doing them a disservice because I'm not connecting with them and I'm unable to help them achieve their goal. So I would say, forget focusing on you. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, that's good. Go ahead, Tom.
Go ahead, Brandon. I just had a follow-up question, sort of. If you're talking about, right, trying something new, going slow or whatever, but is there a perception on the other side as, hey, this is kind of a high-risk place for me to try these things, and if I do a wrong video or I say the wrong thing or I even, look poorly on camera, the consequences could be so large that I'll never. Is that sort of a consideration or idea that goes through people's head, that you find that the consequences seem maybe abnormally large, for compared to just trying something out?
Mm-hmm. You know what, Tom, I would answer that question different today versus pre-pandemic. And I would say pre-pandemic, it would be. And I would say now people are so much more forgiving. I mean, people have dogs and cats and babies on their lap when they're having conversations. People mess up in videos, and it shows their human side. So I would say there is more forgiveness now, for sure. I would say for the person recording the video, if there's still a reluctance, you just practice on your C accounts. If A are your targets, practice on your C's and just get it out there so that if you screw up, it's not a big deal. But the whole thing is, it's asynchronous. I can take 2 or 3 shots and edit it, and I don't have to, if I've made a few mistakes or a few ums and ahs, or, I can re-record it, right, until I get the flow. And so I think the risks is lower because, right now, we're live. I risk here than there is doing it pre-recorded. So I just think people are more forgiving, and sometimes it shows the human side.
I think in today's day and age, I think you're spot on, Karen, especially post-COVID. It's, you guys remember, 7, 8, 9 years ago, or whatever it was, or early YouTube, everything was production quality.
Yeah.
And then when cameras started coming available in our laptops, and we had USB cameras that we could put with it, and all of a sudden it's like whoever had the courage to turn it on and start talking, even if there was somebody, kid crying in the background, or the doorbell rings and a dog barks and everything. We used to be like, we pretended that our families didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And now I think there's actually a reward for the authenticity. And I think part of that is getting back to where we started this, the mindset. When our mindset is to serve, we're able to take the focus off of us and how perfect we are. When the mindset is to ask questions and learn and discover and try to help, then we're not as critical about, was my video perfect?
Mm-hmm.
And I think all that adds to it. And then Karen, just to echo what you said, I mean, the biggest thing we can do is start. Like, just, I like to tell people is when you realize a couple things. One is LinkedIn isn't a sales tool, it's a social network. And when a social or a digital conversation is more like the conversations you'd have with the prospect over dinner instead of the conversation you have with the prospect in a booth, if you play those out, that's what other people on the other side of the screen, they resonate with.
Mm-hmm.
Karen said something super profound earlier that I don't want to get lost on, and it's really around that layer of when we get in our own head and we think about, hey, I've got to look perfect, I've got to sound perfect, all of these things. Like, who are we making that about? We're making that about ourselves, not about our client. So we got to think about how we show up. And that's why I say, like, if you don't have a relationship somewhere and you're using social to form a relationship that you don't have, or invest in a relationship that you don't have, what are you risking if you don't have that relationship? So, I say absolutely go out there, create it. Don't let yourself be intimidated by all the swank productions that are out there. I always talk about how I became an accidental podcaster a couple of years ago because I just missed talking to people in the beginning of the pandemic. So I started talking to people, recording it, putting it out there to start conversations, and it took off. And it was, what had kept me from having a podcast up to that point was because my connotation of it was I needed a big microphone and I needed some swank editing apparatus. And that's not so. You can be a complete amateur like me and still do it meaningfully and, connect with people like this.
You just thought you needed some amazing co-hosts. That's what you were missing.
That's what it was. That's what it took.
That's
That's
right.
what it took.
And that's the key.
Awesome, Tom. The word's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Just one last point on this reluctance thing. We were talking about video, but what about commenting, or even, forget a video thing, but commenting? Do people feel like, oh, I'm going to look stupid, or or something like that, as a reluctance, even, or even just a post that doesn't have any graphics or video on it?
Tom, I did a session yesterday, and the question that was asked to me was, if I send an article on LinkedIn to one of my followers on LinkedIn, are they going to think I'm harassing them? And I paused for a moment because I said, the fact that you're thinking that you are harassing them, like, that's the first area we have to change, is that mindset shift. That if you've had a previous conversation, or you are aware of their point of view or where they stand, and you feel that this article supports them or would help them or add value, how is it harassment? It's harassment if you don't send it. And so I said, how can you just, take a piece of it and say, hey, Tom, I know from our last discussion that you were really interested or honing in on, women in sales. I came across this article in paragraph 3. There's 2 points here that you might find helpful for your upcoming podcast. Let me know how it goes. How is that harassment? So I just said, it's our perception and we're making it about us. But when we're genuinely trying to help, that's helpful. That is someone that says, oh my gosh, I did those 2 points I can use. And so I think it's just, again, taking the focus off of us and going, what is this going to do? How is this going to be helpful? And if it genuinely helps, send away. And if it doesn't, and if it's self-serving, then be mindful of that, because you're going to get, seen through that pretty quickly.
Interesting. Great point. Well, as we wrap up here, what would be, if someone, came to you, and whether a woman or not, but they're thinking about sales, but they're not sure, or maybe they're looking for a new career. I mean, a lot of people are looking for new careers right now and aren't happy in what they're doing. What would you say? What would you recommend, them to do and to think about, to kind of seriously consider this and make this a successful career or a successful job choice?
Mm-hmm. I would look at their inner qualities and their strengths and say, what am I really good at? Am I a curious person? Do I want to genuinely help? Am I scrappy? Like, if I get really offended early, like, sales it's a no game, right? And so you do have to have the 2 lessons I learned early, where you got to have a thick shell and just not take things personally. So even if you do initially, you have to develop that, because it's the type of profession that, like, think about it, we're always getting no's, right? How many times in other professions do you put yourself in these situations where your ego sometimes takes a hit? So I would just say, like, what are you good at? What are some of those strengths you have? Does it help you in sales? What, on the other side, what don't you like? And then I would say, talk to some people who are in sales. Like for me, I started in customer service and with a clear path to get to sales. But I remember going to trade shows and they were painting this big, you can't come behind the curtain and it's only for this elite group. And so then I'm even more curious, going, well, who's behind this curtain? Where's the Oz that everyone's part of that I'm not? So I would go to trade shows. I went and looked at everything a salesperson did to really make sure that this is in line what I wanted to do. And so I kind of got a bit of a testing of the waters. I think there's so many books, there's podcasts, but I just think talking to people who are already in it, even if you can join associations that that give you that inside to really manage your expectations. And you know what, if you try it and you don't like it, like what's the end? I just think take a risk, like bet on yourself, take a risk, and there's no downside. And I would say that if you try it, you probably will end up liking it because there's so many benefits. But you really want to do the research to get in with a good company that morally and ethically aligns to who you are and that supports you and develops the people. And I think after that, you just, the world is your oyster. It's something I've done for my entire life and I have zero regrets.
Awesome. Carson, Brandon, any final questions, thoughts, ideas as we wrap up here?
That's powerful. I think we've kind of run the gamut today as far as reasons to get in, how sales has evolved, how we can get over some of the common blockers that we put in our own way around sales and social, right? So no, this was a great conversation. And Karen, again, like I think it's interesting, just to kind of see your trajectory because you've obviously spent the time in corporate selling. We're successful, and now you get to spend time training teams. So thank you for your contributions to the sales ecosystem that we all love.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So real quick, go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
Yeah, what I would add for people is, when if you're listening to this or you're watching this, look, and you're thinking about sales, you want to get into sales, look for people like Karen and Carson and go learn from them. And know that when you come up to the bro culture or the pound the phone culture or all that stuff, it's prevalent, but it's not everybody. Don't throw sales, right? Mm-hmm. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're listening to two people who have had great careers. They're very successful. They're very happy, and they don't bug people. They don't pound. They come from a heart of serving, and that's what's made them very successful. So if you're just getting into sales, look for people like Karen and Carson and learn from them and mimic them, or find organizations where they are, and know that when you encounter the bad stuff, you're going to encounter, and go knowing in it, you're going to encounter this stuff, but it's not the whole pool.
Well, and related to that, Brandon, I think we see, going full circle, companies that are adopting social selling, like we talk about, and are making it a strategic part of their business. They inherently have that culture. Right. They relish where we get pushback on social selling is wait a minute, we didn't make this many calls a day. We didn't pound the phone enough. So you can look for signs as you're talking to companies as to what strategies, what technologies, what approaches they're taking. And social selling to me is a very good indicator if what they're doing. So Karen, if somebody wants to, learn more about you, connect with you on social, where should they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, Karen Kelly. The K2 Sales Podcast is the podcast I host weekly. And the company is k2perform.com. So any one of those three, they can find me.
And there's a good episode, a couple of
That's a great
podcast you definitely don't want to miss.
Definitely not. And a book.
We didn't do our prep work well. Karen didn't mention a movie. Guys, we got through almost a whole episode without referencing a movie.
It's true. Oh. I referenced an old 90s television show, but that was the closest we
I said Rambo.
That's true. Hey.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Karen.
The streak continues.
That was a really. I thought we were going to have to go another 10 or 15 minutes. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Karen. We will have you back again. Really appreciate your insights, and I think there's a lot to everybody can take away from that. And Carson, Brandon, thank you. We'll see you next week.
Until next time, happy social selling.